Hello Divorce Network. I'm cooperative divorce attorney Erika Englund, here with Team Split Decisions.
I'm Neil Forrester, certified family law specialist and shareholder at Forrester Purcell Stoll in Folsom.
And I'm Beth Hassett, the CEO of WEAVE here in Sacramento.
Today we're talking about domestic violence. So if you have experienced domestic violence in the past or have a family member who has, then this episode may trigger you. For those of you who do want to stay with us, you know us from our radio show Split Decisions, where we're trying to support you in all the ways that divorce might impact your life. There are also all kinds of ways that domestic violence might impact your life. Even if you haven't experienced it, you very likely know someone who has. And what we would like to do today is to talk with you about the different types of domestic violence and the intersection between domestic violence and divorce. There is a lot in the media right now about the Me Too hashtag. So it makes me curious, and Beth, maybe you can answer this question. What is the difference between sexual assault and sexual abuse? Does the Me Too hashtag apply to people that have been sexually abused in a relationship?
It does. Sexual assault can happen either within a relationship, or it can happen with people who are acquaintances or with strangers. So we find that very often when there's domestic violence, there's some form of sexual abuse going on, whether that's reproductive coercion, where somebody is refusing to use contraceptive and making their partner get pregnant, which can help keep them in the relationship, or forcing them to use pornography, or cheating on them. There are all sorts of sexual abuse that may or may not look like the sexual assault you'd see outside of a relationship.
So sometimes when we think of domestic violence, we're thinking about a woman who's being beaten up. And I'm sure that the victims there's much broader definitions of violence, and there are many more victims than just what we might experience.
I think a lot of people discount what's going on in an unhealthy relationship when there isn't that physical violence. And sometimes they're picturing really physical violence. But even somebody throwing something across the room or grabbing you or pushing you, that's all forms of physical abuse. And not every relationship escalates to that point or has that physical element.
But you can experience domestic violence and not experience any physical abuse.
Absolutely. In fact, most people have some form of emotional abuse as one of the primary things going on. Being belittled, being stalked. Stalking is a form of emotional abuse. Being isolated from friends and family. Anything that helps have power and control over that person that isn't a physical means.
Neil, there's financial abuse as well. We see this in court quite a bit.
Yes, we do.
Can you talk with us a little bit about what financial abuse even means, and what's the difference between someone who's just tight with their money and somebody who's actually using that as a means to control their partner? Sure,
and that's what it's about. I mean, the dynamic is about control, and it's very easy to control someone by, controlling their pocketbook, controlling their bank account, and I see that a lot. In initial parts of cases where I discover, okay, my client has no access to the bank account, and so if there were an emergency, can't get resources to get out or protect him or herself, and it's rampant. And other kind of indicators are that credit cards aren't held in both spouses' names; it's just one. And there's other types of controlling behavior that you're going to see as well that don't just have to do with the finances, but also have to do with, like Beth was saying, about emotional abuse and psychological abuse. It's a way to keep someone in their hole and not let them out.
And is it typical that more than one type of abuse might be happening at the same time?
Absolutely. We see a lot of that financial abuse. People's credit has been ruined. They own cars they didn't know they owned, that sort of thing. And it really puts them in a hole, as you said, where they can't get out. Often we see spiritual abuse, where somebody isn't allowed to practice their religion, or they're mocked for their religious views, or their religion is being used to control them. So, the Bible says this, or in our religion you have to do X, Y, and Z. That's another type of abuse. And a relatively new one is technological abuse, where people are using those devices we love to control people.
Do we love them?
Maybe.
It's a love-hate. It's a love-hate relationship.
But cell phones, using Facebook or Instagram to post negative things about the person, any use of technology that's, again, to control somebody, to mess with their mind and have that emotional control over them is another type of abuse.
So that's 6 types altogether. Can we recap those?
physical, emotional, financial, sexual, technological, and spiritual.
And often more than one is happening at the same time.
Absolutely.
So Neil, how does this complicate a divorce matter? You and I both know divorce is just, it's such a difficult process.
Absolutely.
We're trying to make it better for you guys. You can find out more at splitdecisions.pro if you want more divorce support. But we know that it's hard to go through even under good circumstances.
Absolutely. And
what's happening with people emotionally and financially when they're trying to divorce while there is abuse in a relationship?
So that's one of the very first questions I'll ask a client that's sitting across the desk from me is, is there any domestic violence in your relationship, or has there been any physical altercation? And with men in particular, because I ask, both men and women, of course, if there's been any history of violence in the relationship, the pushback I get is, oh, no, he or she never hit me. And that's not the question. The question is there any domestic violence in the relationship, which would go to name calling, financial abuse, all that kind of stuff. That's the very first question that I'm going to ask a client, because it does impact where I'm going to go on the case. Because if I have to get a domestic violence restraining order on file, that is going to color everything else that comes after, and it's going to make it much more difficult. It's going to polarize the parties, right? If we have a restraining order application out there in the middle of a divorce proceeding or a custody proceeding, that's going to make things a little bit more emotionally difficult for everybody involved.
Are judges aware of the different types of domestic violence, and are they willing to grant a restraining order to someone who's not in fear of their physical body?
One would hope. And I've had a kind of a mixed bag of results with different bench officers in different counties. Some have, they're just lawyers and people like the rest of us, right? There's nothing necessarily special about them, except they have a lot of power in these kinds of cases. And so their own experience is going to color what they think is appropriate in terms of protecting a party that's requesting some relief. I have seen restraining orders issued just on, foul-mouthed text messages. I've seen that happen. I've also seen physical abuse get no protection whatsoever.
Wow.
So it's a range. It really just depends on the bench officer on that particular day.
So experiencing domestic abuse in any of these 6 forms doesn't guarantee that the court will provide protections for you, which is quite scary. Whether or not you're divorcing, Beth, what protections does a person have? Where does a person go?
People can contact WEAVE either on our support line, which is 916-920-2952, or on our website. There's a lot of information on our website at weaveinc.org. And we always encourage people to contact us, come up with a safety plan. If they're even thinking of leaving a relationship, it is such a volatile time and it's such a dangerous time when somebody's deciding to leave, whether they're married and they're moving down that path of getting divorced, or if they've just been in a long-term or even a short-term relationship. That lack of control can be that trigger for somebody to get really, really violent and to have something turn dangerous, even if there's never been physical violence in the past.
So you mentioned a safety plan. What's a safety plan?
It's knowing where all your documents are, having them gathered so that if you leave, you can stay gone and not have to return to the house. It's having a plan for where am I going to take the kids? Can I safely take the kids? You can't just take your children and move to Hawaii.
That is true.
There are laws that you need to follow. It's where are you going to go? If you have no resources, you're limited in your options. If you have a lot of resources, you could go get your own apartment. Do you have a vehicle? Is the vehicle in your name? All of those kinds of things. So we really help people know who they might have as allies in their lives. If they have nobody, no support system, come to WEAVE and we can help support you through that time.
Or come to WEAVE even if you do have a support system.
Absolutely.
But we hear, why doesn't she just leave all the time? Why don't they just go? If it's that bad, if they're really being abused, then why would they stay? I wouldn't stay. And at the same time, you're saying the time that people leave is the most critical and potentially the most violent. That's right?
Absolutely. And people stay for all the same reasons that we all stay in healthy relationships. We love each other, we have children together, our finances are commingled, we like our house, we have family that we don't want to leave. All of those things play into the decision to stay or go, whether things are good or bad in your relationship.
That's a really good point. And if it were that simple, then I imagine people would just get out. If it were that easy just to go.
And it never is. And when you start talking about all these barriers around finances, I don't have access to my money, I'm in a religion that says I'm not supposed to get divorced. I've got physical injuries and I'm afraid they're going to get worse. I mean, there are all of these things that just create so many barriers. And we find people who do leave are just exhausted. It's exhausting to pick your life up and make this big decision, and the future is murky. It's a really, really difficult thing to do.
Absolutely.
And going from one situation, particularly if you're divorcing, one situation that's very difficult that you don't control, into court, which is another situation very difficult and no one controls.
Absolutely.
And it must really complicate matters that are in litigation.
It does, and your clients just have to be strong. And as the attorney supporting the client, I have to be strong too. And it's exhausting for me, not nearly as exhausting for for the protected party or for the client in a particular situation. But it is not easy.
And for clients that are interested in mediation but have experienced domestic violence in their past relationships, I just wonder before we close what your ideas are on their capability to mediate through a divorce.
Well, we don't counsel couples who have domestic violence because you've already got that power imbalance.
Absolutely.
And if you're trying to mediate, I believe the idea is that you're coming at it as equal people who are making choices that are best for each other. There's just an inherent imbalance of power when there's domestic violence going on, and I wouldn't recommend it. I think there would probably be a bad outcome for the victim.
Absolutely.
I think of it kind of like a three-legged stool, and if you just shave a little bit off one leg, the whole thing's going to fall over.
Right.
So you have your mediator and both of your participants in mediation, and if they're not able to equally share power, then something will go off the rails. And I don't mean to say if you've experienced any domestic violence in your relationship, then you cannot mediate. I suppose what we're trying to highlight is that there's a power imbalance, and that causes problems. So if you're interested in mediating, start with the most highly trained, highly qualified mediators, and utilize a mediator who will bring in additional support for you.
Absolutely agree.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we're seeing on Facebook is Me Too. And as all these women are posting Me Too, it's been horrifying to see how many women we know that have been impacted by sexual assault. We also see men posting, I believe you. And we want to let you know, if you're out there, that this applies to domestic violence as well. We believe you. There are resources here for you. If you're divorcing, if you're not divorcing, if you have a friend, a family member who you think is experiencing violence, we believe you. And the way that you can get a hold of WEAVE and learn more about all of their amazing resources, Beth?
Our support information line at 916-920-2952 or on our website at weaveinc.org.
Thanks everyone for joining us and for supporting WEAVE during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And until we meet you again, be well.
See you soon.
Bye.